Representative Pickett.
You are recognizable with that hat. That's for sure.
I got recognized in the airport.
Oh, you did?
I was going through security and somebody was like, Matt. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't. And I went to shake his hand. I was, when you have to have, you're an elected representative.
Yeah.
You have to have people be like, hey, Representative Pickett, or like, hey, Doug, right? And you have to go through your index of like, have I met this person?
Oh, yeah, especially if you meet them in some place where you're not used to seeing them, then it really makes you question whether you're recognizing somebody for real or not.
Yeah, I'm going through the TSA clear facial scan, and somebody's like, Matt. And I go to shake his hand, I'm like, who? And he's like, you don't know me. I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for coming in today, sir. I appreciate you. You are the chairman of the House Ed Committee, correct?
Yes.
Fantastic. You were not on the House Ed Committee last year, though.
Honestly, I had never attended a House committee meeting.
God bless you.
In complete transparency, I was on revenue and taxation, and that was my committee, and it met at the same time as education. So, yes, this is new to me. It wasn't on my radar. Okay,
just go. How did you end up as the chairman for the Ed Committee then?
Good question. That's a question I think everybody's been asking, and it's an important one, I think, it's important for me to answer. You should have seen the look on my face when I was asked to do this job, because, we're all educated, but education isn't my professional background. And so there was a lot of self-reflection about why me and why this time, what's important for me to be asked to do this at this time. And there's a lot of hot button issues in education. There's a lot of people that have aligned themselves on various sides of the issues. There was some dissension in the committee last session. I think that's fairly well known.
I don't mean to interrupt. Like what? I don't know anything about.
There's there were just some questions about agreeing on things like what bills were we going to run. There was some dissatisfaction in some of the bills that didn't get passed. I don't know all the details, to be completely honest with you, but I think at the end of the day, the consideration was, let's ask somebody to do this job who can come in and isn't necessarily here to grind an axe or has an agenda other than to get things done and to listen to all the parties and to try to build some unity and move forward. So
I appreciate that. Building the unity, like I was literally a half an hour ago, I got a call and somebody was like, hey, can you go meet with the Senate majority, this guy who's working with all the media stuff for the Republican Senate. I was like, yeah, sure. Like, obviously, like I'm meeting with everybody. It's like, yeah, just go in, meet him. Like, hey, I'm Matt. Like, this is the platform. This is what I'm doing. And he's putting together, options for people to engage with. As I'm walking out of the Capitol, I get a call and the person was like, hey, I'm the minority Senate comms person. Can we, I was like, hey, I'm 30 seconds away. Went in and again, sat down, and it was really striking to me. It's like, okay, here it is. Here are both parties. They have things that they want to get out. They have things they want to express. And it's awesome that both of them are leaning on me. Like, fantastic. Like, yeah, let's get these things lined up, but bringing that unity. So it's like, unity will not necessarily breed agreement, but it will breed functionality. Right. And we need functionality. Like Idaho has an incredibly functional state government, at least compared to other places I've seen, and especially compared to our national government. And we need to be unified for the Idaho people. How we get there may be a little different, right? Yes. But let's be on the same page there.
Yes. No. And that, one of the things I've learned for sure being here in Boise in the legislature is that no matter where you come from or what your background is or your policy positions are, there is room for consensus. And there's the talking points that we hear out in the media. And then when we get in the back rooms, a lot of times one-on-one, we start to see things together. Like, okay, let's build here. This is something we can agree on. Let's start here and see where we can go. And then of course it all goes out in the media and gets blown up at the end of the day. But there is opportunity, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There is opportunity for us to see both sides of an issue. And whether that comes out in the open, it probably doesn't as much as it should, but there is some room for building there.
One criticism of educators that I have heard from a lot of people is that they spend this money. They're not responsible for making the money. They ask for it, and it could be upgrades. It could be whatever. And there's just a sentiment, or at least a thought process out there, which is like, you're spending other people's money. You're not producing anything related to monetary value. They would obviously, a lot of people would disagree. They're like, hey, without an educated populace, we're not going to have an increase in GDP and things like that. But there is that criticism that it's this enormous cost. Education is this huge price tag. And the question then comes back to like, okay, well, are we using it responsibly? You were on rev and tax, and now you're on education. Education obviously being one of these huge price tags for Idaho, and now like roundly in the spotlight around the idea of, hey, should we take some of Idaho's hard-earned tax dollars and allow people to essentially pay private entities to educate kids instead of working within the system? Like, just from a tax standpoint or from a revenue standpoint, do you think that's possible without increasing the amount we spend on education?
Well, that is one of the primary questions: is what will the effect be on future budgets, future right. education budgets, if we make this choice, if we make this decision. And I would like to say I come at this from maybe a different perspective than most people realize. I'm from a small town. I'm from a small rural town that doesn't have a lot of choice options. So a lot of times I get the question, well, where are you at on choice? Obviously, choice is going to affect small towns more than large urban areas, right? Because you don't have as many opportunities to take advantage of that. But I think there's some important distinctions there in this question. For example, I think that even though small towns, we may not be completely satisfied with the options we have academically, I think that a lot of the issues that are driving choice, the choice decision, are less critical or less involving small districts or small public schools than they are large public schools. And I'll give you an example of that. We had in our school a coach, a basketball coach, that really connected with my kids. He was very disciplined, very structured, very capable, turned the program completely around, did a great job, was sought after. He was recruited. He came to town, to the Treasure Valley, and he coaches here in the Treasure Valley. And so I asked him one day, I said, what's the difference? What do you see? What are some of the differences you see between coaching in a little homogenous, tight-knit town, moving to a large urban area, right, district? It was amazing the answer he got. It was, of course, there's all these other academic options that are available, and probably better skilled teachers, all of these things, better financed programs. But he said, one day I was standing in the door of my classroom, and I was just watching people go through, He says, I hardly see the same people twice in a school that size. But one kid came up to him and essentially assaulted him verbally to his face, who he had never even seen this kid before. And it was like, I don't even know why that happened. But those things never happen in a small town. But they happen in these bigger urban areas. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that, yes, we may not get the choice options in rural areas, but the public schools in rural areas oftentimes are better at reflecting the values of the local town than the large urban schools are. And so you have this tension from parents in urban areas who aren't seeing the benefits that I see in my little public town school in the urban area, and they want a choice. And so that's a perspective that we don't always see out in the public that really exists. I think small schools do more with less. Even though they don't have the options, I think they do more with less, and I think they do reflect the values of their families and their community better sometimes than the large schools do.
There's a gal in Cassia County who is related to the Farm Bureau, and we have this like ongoing conversation on Instagram. I don't know who this gal is, like, at all.
Okay.
But she just started this conversation with me one day, based on a clip I put out about. It was like illegal immigrants or something. It was this random thing. And now our conversation has spanned all of these varied topics. And she told me recently, she was like, listen, almost identical to what you were saying, which is that there's there are a lot of things that small rural areas can do. And she was like, just because you're a rural area doesn't mean you're getting a bad quality or a bad experience, because, you know, you have engaged parents, you're stretching resources incredibly. You can really circle the wagons and take care of the things that you need to take care of, which I thought was so cool. Like, wow, that's great. Like, that's really important to understand. And taking that into account, I mean, let's say that the majority of the rural areas just don't have that many options, and their schools are more likely reflecting the community values just because, you know, you have a tighter knit community. Then the school choice option looks to be something that predominantly benefits the more urbanized areas, right? As you're saying, like, so you're looking at the Boise school district, you're looking at the West Ada school district, you're looking at, you know, maybe the Nampa school district, right? I think those are the largest 3 in the state, and they're all right here in the Treasure Valley.
Right.
We have currently a dump truck of options. And if we are just like, we have charter schools, which are great, right? We have public schools, which are great. We have homeschool, which is great. We have, and then just classic private schools. And then even within the classic private schools, you have classic private schools that are tech-based, that are like, you know, 3 days on, 2 days off. You know, you have these homeschool combinations. You have all kinds of things. So we have choices, right? And the question really comes down to, like, you were in revenue tax. Okay, so here's a question. I've always made this assumption, but I'd love to find out. Are there any dollars that we as the state of Idaho currently spend? We take dollars from me and you, put them in the state's coffers, and then distribute them. Are there any distributed state dollars that we spend on any program that has no accountability? Like, does that exist?
Well, I would say no. I mean, there would be no intent for that, for sure. And so if that ever were the case, I think you'd see some objections and some problems immediately in the use of that money. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. And the reason I ask is because, you know, obviously with the school choice argument, there are these two sides just screaming at each other, right? And it's like trying to parse this out. Obviously, the people that are against it are saying you're going to spend tax dollars with no strings attached. And what's really hitting me is like, that doesn't exist, right? Like, that world of free tax money just because doesn't have, like, we would be breaking precedents with like hundreds of years of tax policy, like across the nation, if we were just like dump truck of money, like take this money. So like, that's one thing to me that, at least hearing that from you, it's like, no, that doesn't exist. Like, we would be paving like a new way of spending people's money.
Well, to a certain extent, it becomes a question of not if there's accountability, but where is the accountability? So the people that are saying that are saying we don't have any accountability for where that tax money is going, right? Because we've given the responsibility for the accountability to the parents. So when I go in and I see these arguments against choice that say, well, look at this picture of a private school in a strip mall, and they say, why would you ever send your kids there? And I say to them, yes, why would you ever send your kids there? Because that is the question. Why would parents choose this over the alternatives, whether it's another private alternative or a public school? But the answer is that yes, they are choosing that. And there's a reason why they are choosing that. And I don't think that we can say that they're naively making these choices. They're seeing some value there that by sending their kids there. I don't think they're just saying, we're going to take half of what it costs to educate a student and pull our kid out of the public school where he can't be on the football team or on the band, and send him to a strip mall school that does what that image displays or portrays that it will do to that kid, without some value, without some purpose, without some intent, without some accountability. Sure. They obviously see some value there.
I get that. I get that 100%. But like, let's say ISP, right? I was talking to Colonel Gardner the other day because, you know, a lot has been talked about ISP's budget, and I think it's north of like $100 million, which is crazy. And he was like, our biggest expense is like gasoline. I'm like, what? He's like, you have like 700 vehicles filled up twice a day. He was like, yeah, it's millions and millions of dollars on gas. Like, anyway, so they're going to come in and just like walk through the budget of like, this is where the money's going. So if Colonel Gardner is like accountable for that, right? The state of Idaho doesn't just say, okay, Colonel Gardner, as long as you're happy with all this, we're happy with all this, right? There's oversight and there's justification. So he's accountable to it, as in he has to answer to the state for this is the value the state got out of these dollars. Now, I'm the guy, Colonel Gardner, am the guy who takes this and makes sure that I can respond to you and say, this is the value I got.
Right.
There's no position where it's like, we just trust that he likes it for whatever reason that goes like unchecked.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, there has to be some demonstrable value or accountability back.
Yes.
That comes back to us in terms of, whatever that looks like, however we want to measure that, whether it's go on rates, whatever, testing, whatever.
Sure.
And I think the governor's insisting on that. I think that's going to be something that we'll have to be able to answer to, not only for the general public, but to be able to pass this through the houses and get it across the governor's desk. There's going to have to be some transparency and accountability, and I think there's an effort to make that happen.
I don't want to spend all day talking about vouchers with you. I have limited time with you. I know it's a working day. I really appreciate you coming. The other aspect of education is, and you hit on it, which is, hey, the point of public education is to reflect community values. I mean, that's essentially at the core of charter schools, right? And I've studied this a long time ago, back in the day in college as an idiot, but that's the core of it, which is, hey, you're not reflecting our values. We deserve a public school that is funded by the state that reflects our values.
Right.
And I get that 100%. The question of values comes down to relevance and community values. And public school is attempting to adapt to the maintaining relevance, right? And Superintendent Critchfield is talking about, digital literacy and, a different graduation test or graduation requirements. Do you think that Idaho is doing enough to justify or express its perceived relevance to the population? Like, this is why this public school and our public education is relevant to you. Let me explain it to you.
Right. I think that is the question. And when the topic of choice comes up to me, really I turn it back on the people that are asking the question. Why is it that we're having this conversation? So the answer would be no, because if it were yes, then we wouldn't be having these conversations at this level. Parents wouldn't be driving the debate to the extent that they are continually. Every year, an increasing desire for more choice, more options, more ability to do whatever we want to do with our kids, and guide and direct their pathways than there has been historically. And so I think there is a lot more that can be done there. And I do think that at the end of the day, that this will be a beneficial thing for public schools, because it will make them better. And in a lot of cases, I think it will create an opportunity for them to find solutions to their own problems, rather than everybody telling them from the outside or up above or wherever, this is how you need to do things. I think that they will respond more creatively to the needs of the parents and the communities that they serve.
One question for you about the concept of choice. Okay. Mm-hmm. And you just mentioned, parents want to have a choice. Okay. And I think that betrays kind of the nuance of this whole issue, right? It's like, I have a choice. You have a choice. Like, we could, there's nothing preventing me from pulling my kids from public school and sending them to private school. So it's not that I don't have it there, and there's certainly nothing preventing me from homeschooling my kids.
Right.
So I have choices right now. The real question is choices supported by public dollars. Mm-hmm. That's what the fight is for, right? It's not that we don't have choices. It's that the choices, more people want it to be, for lack of a better word, like a zero-sum game, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I come over here, you are losing something, right? And maybe this, whatever the amount of money would be that followed the kid, maybe it's not even funding this in private school completely or the private school tuition, but you certainly aren't getting that money. So it's not just a choice. It's, hey, a choice with repercussions for the system I'm leaving.
Yes, and that's a fair assessment, and I do think there is an effort underway to make sure that this just isn't for kids that have the means, or families that have the means to pull their kids and put them in private schools, or that are already doing it right now. But I think the effort is also to make it available to disadvantaged kids, maybe kids that come from less affluent homes. Up to 300%, I think, is what I'm hearing of the national poverty rate. That might be a number that's being pegged in the bill. I haven't seen the bill yet, but that's something that's being discussed, that so that this isn't just for, to compensate kids that are already doing these things, even though it will compensate them at least partially. I think about half of the cost of $5,000. And so, but that this will also help those kids that need to get out of the system, whatever it may be, bullying, whatever the case may be, that just aren't in a good situation, that they too can have that opportunity to transition and move into a private setting if they need to.
Gotcha. You mentioned right before we started, I think the governor of Arizona had come to Idaho and done a presentation on school choice. Arizona is one of those incredible cases where both the proponents and the opponents of a position are referencing Arizona. So it's like whichever angle you kind of look at it, like people are utilizing that thing to say like, see, this is why, right? Like obviously the opponents are saying it ballooned to like the budget set out. It was originally like $100 million or something. It's ballooned almost to $1 billion. And then what's I actually haven't really heard, like, what for the proponents of choice, what are they referencing Arizona? I know people say like, well, just look at Arizona. I'm like, what part? Like, I don't understand what you're saying to me. Yeah. What aspect of the choice program or voucher program in Arizona are people touting as a great success?
Well, I think some of the things that are irrefutable that we heard in those presentations were the fact that, yes, Arizona is growing. And so, you can't say that, that's really pulling away from public education, because the growth in Arizona is sustaining public education for sure. And then there's also this growth in the private education because of their choice options. But I think it's fairly demonstrable that, it hasn't shut down the Friday night lights in Arizona. I think that those things are irrefutable. They can be proven, right? They're not abstract. It hasn't shut down public schools. Public schools are still operating in Arizona. And so all of those things, when you look at that, and when you say that we can sustain public education in Arizona, because I think that's fairly clear that public education is being sustained there, and then also have these choice options, and that can grow as it needs to, as the demand for it allows, and still fund these other things. I think the picture is fairly clear that that's functioning, that's working for them.
Gotcha. So they're like, hey, look, you say this is going to shut down everything. It's going to say, like, come to the football game. Yeah. Like it's happening. Yeah. Like, we can live stream it. Like, you can see, like, yes, we had a certain portion of people leave on the voucher program, but like, we are still funding our sports programs or whatever. Gotcha. Are we currently fulfilling our education obligations, our constitutional obligations in the state of Idaho? Like, are we at this point where we're like, oh no, Idaho's nailing it, we've already done what we're mandated to do, and like, we're just making this auxiliary program?
Well, I don't think I'd ever say that we're fulfilling everything that we should be doing. I think we're doing well, especially given the resources that we have, and I think we're doing much better than the national funding level comparison among states would indicate.
We're number one bang for the buck in the country,
absolutely.
Right? Like 50th, and then I believe the U.S. News Reports had an overall education assessment of Idaho of, I believe, number 18th, and our higher education was number 11th. Like, right. Yeah.
Right. And when you go back and you talk about, because there's this conversation about launch and about the go-on rate and how launch has affected the go-on rate, and I kind of take a step back from some of these things, and I think, well, wait a minute. The go-on rate should go up with something like launch, but what was happening before? Well, some of these kids, the economy in Idaho is so strong, and the demand for filling these jobs is so strong, that some of these kids were being attracted away from going on and being trained by the business sector to do the jobs that now launch is paying for, to be trained in a university or a trade setting, whatever the case may be. So that's a little bit like, the presumption would be, if we didn't see the go on rate as high as we wanted it to, that those kids weren't doing something that they are yet doing the same thing now. We're just measuring it as a go on rate, whereas before the businesses were training them to do those jobs anyway. And now the system is being funded by the government to train them to do the jobs for the businesses. So I think that, do you understand what I'm saying? I think there's a little bit of a disconnect in that.
Okay, so essentially you're saying we're patting ourselves on the back because
Right.
the launch program has changed the metric by which we gauge our educational success. And
Yes.
we're now gauging people that use the launch program as people that are engaging in higher education.
Right.
And in reality, there was a certain portion of those people that were already engaging
Yeah.
that. We just weren't counting them.
Yeah. The private sector was training the linemen. It was financing their training. It was maybe training truck drivers, helping them finance their CDL training. Now we're doing that through launch, and that's reflected in a higher go-on rate, so to speak. That launch is working because these kids are moving into these trades. Well, if the demand is there for those trades anyway, the private sector is going to fill that demand, right? So who's actually filling it? Who's actually paying for it is the only question that was resolved in that.
This is such an interesting topic to me because if you look at like a history major at BSU, that kid who's just like 19, 20, whatever, like not bad that you're studying history, but you're taking $26,000 of Idaho taxpayer money every single year to get your history degree. So we could make the same argument, which is, hey, if the value of this history degree, if it was meritorious enough and it was valuable enough, then like they would be getting the history degree in the absence of this taxpayer funding. But we don't look at higher education that way. We're like, no, this is important.
Yeah.
And essentially, if you look at $26,000 over a 4-year span, you're looking at $104,000. So we're saying, hey, we believe in your history degree, and you kid who most likely academically was like higher than, in the top 50% of your class, whatever it is, as opposed to the other kids. And because you chose this, we're going to invest an additional over $100,000 in you because we believe in your, philosophy degree. Now, mind you, I studied liberal arts, so like I understand how absurd it is, and like what's my real value to the world? Like I'm not making anything here other than a crummy YouTube video, but I do recognize it's like, well, why is Idaho investing in these diplomas that don't have we don't have a lack of history degrees here.
Yeah.
We have a lack of linemen. But when you talk about the launch program, they're like, okay, we're going to invest $10,000 in this lineman that we desperately need.
Yeah.
And we're already investing the 100+ in the history guy. People are like, oh, no. You can't give the lineman that money. Like, no. That should be like Idaho Power's job, or that should be somebody else's job. It's like, what? Well, then why are we funding? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, why are we giving that money in order of magnitude greater to the kid who's just like studying history?
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you. There's a much greater cost there involved in those kids that are in those university programs that aren't directly tied to a private sector job, necessarily.
Right. They're not like terminal degrees. You walk out and everybody's like, oh my God, go to the job fair. They're dying for history degrees. Yeah. Like, get in there, buddy.
Yeah. Well, and that's fine. And I get that. And we do subsidize those degrees. The issue I had was with high demand in demand career jobs that weren't being filled. And quite frankly, we don't have the fertility rate in Idaho to fill the jobs that are here in Idaho anyway. We have to rely on not just Idaho kids to fill these jobs. I mean, our fertility rate is 1.9, and
I don't understand what that means.
So that'd be like 1.9 kids per.
Oh, you're literally talking fertility rate. Okay, reproductive rate.
Yeah,
okay,
reproductive rate. Yeah. So like,
well, I'm doing my part. I brought my family here. I brought my 3 kids here. Like, you're welcome.
We need you.
Hey,
yes.
You're the first person who's ever said that. Like, I'm the scourge of society to most people. It's like, damn Californian. It's like, former Californian, former.
Nobody wants to admit that, but it's true.
I thought you were just going to say nobody wants you. I'm like, I know.
It is
like
true. Well, of course. Yeah. We'll take your type any day. But the reality of the matter is that if we do want our economy to keep growing, we can't just supply those jobs from home. It's not possible. Mathematically, it's not there. And so to say that we're gonna incentivize kids to stay home and take Idaho jobs, that's great. That's a great aspiring goal. It's not sufficient. It needs to be more than that. And the private sector is saying, you know what? Really, the private sector to themselves is saying, we're going to train these kids whether you do something like launch or not, because we've got to have them. I had one business owner said to me during that debate, if there were 400 welders, I would hire every one of them today, an Idaho-based business. And I thought, that's great, but there's no way you're ever going to find them because they don't exist in Idaho. You're going to have to rely on somebody people moving to Idaho to fill these jobs. So to really answer that question about filling in-demand careers, it's going to take something bigger than launch. It's not that, it's just a great big demand on our.
Let's solve this. Let's solve this right now.
Yeah.
What is it going to take? Because you got the answer. I
Yeah.
know you do in there.
Yeah.
What do we do? We have one, like other states have work programs that apparently, like Florida has a great work program that apparently is working well. Like, what are they doing that we're not doing?
Well, I don't think that it's not that we're not doing anything. Idaho's the fastest growing state in the nation. I think what we have is working. And I do think that the part of the reason why you're not seeing the support for funding launch going forward in the legislature is the fact that really these things are happening in Idaho already. And we don't really need to incentivize people to stay in Idaho because Idaho is what it is. Look at what's happening. Look at the growth we have. People are talking about, well, maybe we're growing too fast. The demand on our water, the demand on our infrastructure, our highways, our transportation. How much can we sustain in a certain amount of time? And so it's all a big balancing act. And so when we try to incentivize those things with taxpayer dollars, that to me is an important consideration. And that's one of the reasons why, honestly, I didn't vote for launch initially. It was because I really felt it was the private sector's job to do those things, and I thought they were already doing them.
And again, just to be clear, like using the history guy, right? What, like, would you be in favor of eliminating funding for like BSU then? Or is it
no,
like, is there, okay. And I'm not trying to pigeonhole you. I just, it doesn't make sense to me that like, okay, why are we funding? Like I was a rhetoric major.
Yeah.
Like what, like you come out of the, like, I did want to go to law school, which I didn't, but that was like my play. I'm like, well, I can take this and go to law school. Like why, if you're a policymaker, you're looking at 22-year-old Matt, like this guy's doing nothing, right? And you wouldn't be entirely wrong from like all of the people I graduated with, but why be on board with funding me, the dumb rhetoric major, who's going to go on to do like nothing but wear headphones? Like what, like why me and not some kid who's 18 and like, throw him a bone, give him $10,000 like this company, but like why rely exclusively on the private sector to incentivize appropriately, but fund the rhetoric major?
The first answer to that question is simple. It's because the private sector is willing to fund it themselves. In your case, no, the private sector is not going to fund the history major, but we still need professionals. We need lawyers. We need people that will take that history major and go on to get that law degree or whatever, be in the broadcasting business. We need those people, but the private sector is more likely to step up and take care of those in demand, those jobs that really need somebody on deck right now. They're more able and willing to do that right now. The longer term investments in professional education and that's going to require some public investment and incentive to get people to take those positions and go through those programs.
Man, this is a wild time. This is the wildest time to be alive. Don't you? Like, this is crazy that we're going through all this. Like, man, intense. Listen, I really appreciate you. It's a working day. Thank you for making the time here. I don't want to be too greedy with it. Is there anything you'd like to say here at the end? And again, you're absolutely more than welcome to come back. I hope you do. But like, anything for this first round.
No, I just appreciate the opportunity, Matt. I've watched your podcasts, several of them, and I think one thing I do appreciate about what you do is you seem to reflect all sides of the issues and you have a wide variety of guests, and I think that's very useful for everybody to see things, have a broad perspective on all the issues. So it's good to be here with you.
Man, an informed and educated populace, right?
Yeah.
Like somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
And we all want the information.
Yeah.
It's just really hard to make it in a way that people will consume it. So thank you for helping me do that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you. Please come back. We'll do it again.
Yeah. Very good. Thanks.